Washington, D.C. We have Mr. Rajnikant Rai, who is the Divisional Chief Executive of Agri Business at ITC. And we have, most importantly, a true representative of farmers, an activist himself, more important, a farmer himself, who understands these issues firsthand, Mr. Gunvant Patil. Let me, with your permission, all of you, spend a few minutes just to set the context for what I'm sure will be a very interesting, inclusive conversation, which will hopefully lead to constructive and creative ideas on the way forward for India in this very critical domain. Now, I can't help the fact that I'm an economist by training, so I tend to see things first from an economics lens. Now, the economic fact that I want to drive home is this relentless economic phenomenon observed near universally, which is that as countries develop and as their per capita GDP increases, the share of agriculture in the GDP, in the total national income, and the share of agriculture in the labor force necessarily decline. And very often, this decline is quite steep. Now, for many, the characterization of this as a reduced importance of agriculture in the economy. Whereas, I don't entirely believe that this is the full and correct picture. The obverse, the other way of looking at it is the huge increase in agricultural productivity, which is actually causing this steep decline of proportion of agriculture in GDP and workforce. In plain, simple English, for feeding a much larger national and global population, less and less people are needed in the core agriculture sector. Now, this is, as I said, an economic phenomenon with which we can't quarrel because this is history of economic development. Now, I think the questions that this poses are, in my opinion, relevant for this discussion today, essentially two. One, on what terms of trade does agriculture trade with the rest of the economy? What are the terms of engagement of this agricultural production with the rest of the economy? Now, given the huge increase in supply, I mentioned that agriculture production goes up. It is axiomatic that agricultural prices will fall. And this has severe implications for both incomes and livelihoods. So, question number one that we need to look at in a larger context is the terms of trade of this engagement. Second question is what happens to this huge population which is hitherto dependent on agriculture. Remember, we are now talking about millions and millions of people. It's not a small number that we're talking about. And typically, millions of people not necessarily endowed with skills required for the modern economy. Now, let me quickly summarize the the direction of the conversation that I would like. Clearly, you have the right to nuance it in your responses. Given that we have large numbers of traders, large number of farmers, we need market mechanisms. Given, however, going back to basic economics, that there is fundamental information asymmetry. That is, the information that the farmers have is not the same as the information that traders have. And two, there will always be, and across the world, large economically powerful purchasers really leading to what in theory is called monopsony, namely a powerful purchaser pitted against millions of not so powerful sellers. This is a sure recipe for what pure simple economic theory tells us are market failures. So, starting from first principles, we need to focus, in my opinion, on both markets and policy. I don't think it's an either or question, but an and question. My personal opinion, for what it is worth, I think over a long period of time, India has got both wrong. We got our markets wrong, we got our policies wrong. And I'm making a very broad general statement. I think in this context and background, what we need to discuss is the way forward. As I mentioned, we have a truly representative panel and an equally representative audience. And we need to now go forward and ideally craft a way for how do we increase livelihoods, how do we better the livelihoods that exist, b, how do we harness technology, entrepreneurship, and an ecosystem that supports innovation. I'll conclude here, and maybe if the panel is ready, I will start with Charanjit ji, JS National Rural Livelihoods Mission, and a former director for many years in the Department of Land Resources, a person very familiar with the questions that we are discussing. Charanjit साहब, आप जो है 1-2 मिनट में छोटा सा अपना 1-आधे मिनट का परिचय दें and get on with your 2-3 minute statement, first cut statement on the way forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for setting the stage for this panel discussion. Sir, as directed, I will just give a brief background of mine. I belong to Indian Forest Service from Madhya Pradesh cadre.